Welcome to a day of pantry meals. I am challenging myself to stay out of the grocery store, save some money, as well as eat up some of the things that have been lingering in my pantry and freezer for a while. So, like any great day, we are starting with a latte. And now, when it comes time for breakfast, we're going to make some fluffy buttermilk pancakes. This is a recipe by itslibbe.com, and I will have it right at the top of the description box for you guys. This recipe is so simple. It calls for 1 cup of buttermilk, which is done by just adding a cup of milk of your choice. I just prefer plant-based milk, and adding about a teaspoon. I go a little bit heavier of apple cider vinegar, and it really thickens up the milk and adds that little tang that buttermilk adds to so many recipes. I use this buttermilk for almost every baked good, but the dry ingredients for this are just a cup of flour, 2 teaspoons baking powder, 2 tablespoons of sugar, a pinch of salt, and a tablespoon of oil. So once the buttermilk has been sitting, I'm just going to add that tablespoon of oil in. It's been sitting for about 5 minutes, I would say. And then I'm just going to mix that together a little bit and then dump it into the dry ingredients, and we're just going to combine that all together. Just getting the major lumps out here. We don't want to overmix the batter, but we just want to make sure it's mostly incorporated. And then once the pan is nice and hot, I'm just going to spoon in my batter, making the pancakes whatever size is preferable for you. And just cooking those until the bubbles come through the other side and they look done. Give them a flip and give them a few more minutes. These are a delicious, easy pancake that I make all the time. Now it's time for some lunch. I'm gonna make a pretty easy stir fry over some rice. So I'm just gonna get the rice started. This is 20-minute rice, but use whatever rice you have on hand. I'm gonna be doing a stir fry of bok choy. So I am just washing them really well and then cutting them into quarters, but leaving the ends intact so that they hang on together. Realizing they were a little bit too large than what I wanted, so I actually cut them down further into 8ths. And now I'm just slicing up some onion to add to the dish as well. I got this stir fry sauce recipe from Madeline Olivia. I'll see if I can find her original video and link it below for you guys. It's just a really easy go-to when you don't have a pre-made jar of sauce hanging around. And I do keep this recipe taped to the inside of my cabinet just to make it really easy for myself, but it's just 2 tablespoons of ketchup, 2 tablespoons liquid aminos, 3 tablespoons of vinegar, either apple cider or rice vinegar, whichever your preference, a couple tablespoons of brown sugar, and a couple tablespoons of water. It's not glamorous, but it certainly gets the job done when you're in a pinch. So now I'm just going to heat up some oil in the pan, and when that's hot, get the onions going, give those guys a minute, and then toss in the bok choys. I'm just going to stir fry that down. I apologize, I didn't turn the camera on to show me dumping in the sauce, but you just want to dump that in when your vegetables are maybe a couple of minutes away from being the doneness that you like them. I did add in a little bit of arrowroot starch just to thicken it up. I had a little too much water in there. I think it just wasn't thickening up in the way that I normally would like it to, but that's okay. The arrowroot thickened it up nicely, and then once the rice was ready and the stir fry was done, I just plated that up, adding some sea kelp sprinkles to get some iodine and some sesame seeds. Feel free to use obviously whatever vegetables you like with whatever toppings you like. Stir fries are so easy. Now for dinner, I'm going to be making a lentil and rice loaf from drmcdougall.com, as well as a crispy roast potato recipe that I found on Pinterest. So a little bit more complex, but here I'm just gonna get some lentils cooking for the loaf and start preparing my veggies. So the potatoes, just washing those up and getting them chopped up. The crispy roast potatoes recipe I'm using is delicious, and I'm going to pin that recipe below for you guys as well. In the instructions of the recipe, it's very thorough about the different kinds of potatoes you can use here, but they come out so good. So I'm just starting those, getting them boiled, and then moving on to prep the rest of the veggies for the lentil loaf. So I'm just dicing up an onion, dicing up 1 rib of celery, and then dicing up 1 large carrot. I don't actually have all of the ingredients on hand for this recipe, but I'm just winging it with what I have. For example, this recipe also called for mushrooms, but I just don't have any right now. And I also do not have any rosemary or sage. So I am modifying this recipe, which is totally fine. I like to look at recipes and just get ideas, but I'm just gonna get that onion and celery sauteing, and now I'm just mixing up the other ingredients, which is 3/4 of a cup of oats, and the recipe calls for quick rolled oats. These are actually old-fashioned, so I didn't have quick. And I have some leftover rice from the stir fry earlier, and now I'm just adding some tomato paste. Again, the recipe calls for a 6-ounce can. I only had this squeeze tube, so I just squeezed in a few tablespoons, and then I'm adding some fresh thyme, some dried parsley, and some of this Mushroom and Company umami seasoning I got from Trader Joe's just to add some flavor. The original recipe calls for poultry seasoning, and I just didn't have any on hand. And now that the onion and celery have sauteed for a few minutes until translucent, I've added them to the bowl as well. And then back over on the pan, I've added some more oil and a bunch of garlic. Now this garlic is for the potatoes, and you just want to brown it up. And then I'm setting that aside for when the potatoes are ready, and the lentils and potatoes are looking ready. So I'm going to get everybody off the heat and drained. The potatoes look great. Now dumping all of that delicious garlicky oil on top. Again, the original recipe called for some fresh herbs in the pan here as well, but I just didn't have any, so I'm just using plain garlic for the moment, and then just giving it a good stir. Go, here's some chives. I needed to use up the rest of those, so I dumped the rest of those in, as well as some more of that parsley and some salt and pepper. And you just put the lid on and give it a pretty good shake in all directions, just to make sure everything's really incorporated. And it kind of adds like a creamy layer of mashed potato to the outside of these. They're so good. But then you just want to get them onto a roasting pan. I also have the diced carrot on here as well. I think I misspoke earlier. Those were not for the loaf. I just wanted an additional vegetable to have on the side. So I'm just going to put a little bit of oil over those and some seasoning, get them mixed up, and get this whole roast pan into the oven. The only thing that's tricky here is the lentil loaf and the potatoes have very different temperatures that they cook at. The potatoes cook at 450, whereas the lentil loaf cooks at 350. So I just was trying to be mindful of that. And so I'll just have to watch when I put this lentil loaf in. But now that the lentils are done, I can stir that into the rice, oat, and seasoning mixture and just get that all incorporated. And now the next step is to get the pan ready, which the recipe says to line it with parchment so it doesn't stick, but I don't like using single-use things if I can help it. So I'm just greasing this pan as best as I can and just gonna hope for the best, because sometimes lentils and things that are typically a little on the drier side can go a bit nightmarish here if anything sticks to the pan. So just doing the best that I can and seeing what happens. And now the recipe says you want to put all of this lentil loaf mixture into a food processor. I unfortunately only have this little one that is an attachment for my stick blender or immersion blender. So it's quite small, and I'm going to have to do this in batches, but that is okay. And it's certainly not the most even chopping, if you will, but it gets the job done good enough. I believe it took me about 4 rounds of getting all of this through the processor, but we got there. And then you just want to mash it down. And now I have some barbecue sauce that I have had hanging around in the fridge a little too long. When I was growing up, my parents used to put ketchup or barbecue sauce or a combination of both or something on top just as a little glaze. So I'm just doing that here just to add a little bit of flavor. You definitely do not have to do that. It's not part of the recipe. Now, the potatoes have been in the oven for about 20 minutes, so you're just going to take them out and give them a flip and stir and make sure they're going to get crispy on all sides. And at this point, the carrots were actually feeling pretty done, so I didn't want to cook them to death, so I just pulled them out of the oven and put the potatoes back in for their final cook of another 20-ish minutes. And then tuck that lentil loaf in as well to get it started. It normally cooks for 30 minutes at 350, but since I had the oven so hot, I just put it in there but kept an eye on it. So at this point, the potatoes are looking wonderfully crispy and done. So I'm just giving that lentil loaf a few extra minutes. I want to say I cooked this about 20 minutes at the higher temperature. I just wanted it to set. I wasn't worried about it not being cooked through since I knew all the ingredients in the middle were essentially cooked other than the oats. So I wasn't too worried about the time frame. I just wanted to make sure it was set but not fully dried out. So 20 minutes felt about right at the higher temperature. Again, doing this the right way, I would cook it at the lower temperature, like the recipe says, for the prescribed time. But I was trying to cram two recipes together at once, as I typically do. So everything came out really delicious. I liked the flavor in the loaf quite a bit. That umami seasoning really helped out if since I didn't have poultry seasoning. But all in all, a very delicious day of cupboard meals.